The widow inherits a vacant lot, but what she finds underground changes her life. Jessica Carter held the baby against her chest while looking at the crumpled paper in her hand. The notification from the notary's office had arrived on a morning that had already started badly, with Ryan Michael crying non-stop and the overdue electric bill on the kitchen table. The notary's phone call had been straight to the point. She had inherited a piece of land from a certain Aunt Eleanor, her late grandmother's sister. Jessica didn't even know this aunt existed. The man explained that the woman had left a will bequeathing the property to the only living heir of the Carter family. When she asked about its value, the silence on the other end of the line was the first clue something was wrong. "Ma'am, it's a rural lot. Very simple. The documentation is in order, but—" The voice hesitated. "You'll need to go there in person to sign the transfer papers." Jessica looked at the tiny apartment she shared with her 3-month-old son. The peeling walls seemed to close in on her ever since Daniel had left. The construction site accident had taken not only her husband, but also all the dreams they had built together. The company's insurance was slow to come through, and her savings had been exhausted with the funeral expenses. Ryan Michael whimpered in the makeshift crib Daniel had made from wooden crates. The baby had been born premature and still needed special care she could barely afford. Last week's pediatrician appointment had cost the money she had left for food. Now there were only a few diapers and 2 jars of baby food left. "Maybe it's our salvation, my love," she whispered to her son, stroking his thin hair. "Maybe we can sell this land and start over." The trip to the small town of St. Benedict Valley cost the last $30 she had saved in a coffee can. The bus rattled down dirt roads for 4 hours, with Ryan Michael alternating between restless sleep and hungry cries. Jessica shared the only bottle she had brought with him, diluting the powdered milk to make it last longer. Getting off at the tiny bus station, she asked for directions from an elderly man selling fruit at a makeshift stand. He looked at her suspiciously when she mentioned the name Eleanor Carter. "Mrs. Eleanor, who lived on the farm out towards Dry Creek?" he asked, scratching his grey beard. "I think so. I inherited some land from her." The man let out a bitter laugh. "Young lady, you came looking for weeds and rocks. That property isn't even worth the paper the deed is printed on. Old Eleanor lived like a hermit out there, planting cassava and raising chickens. When she passed, the place was left abandoned." Jessica's heart sank, but she needed to see it with her own eyes. Following the fruit seller's vague directions, she walked down the dirt road carrying Ryan Michael in one arm and an old suitcase in the other. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she stopped several times to give the baby water and try to cool off in the scant shade of the trees. 2 hours later, she arrived at what was supposed to be her inheritance. The land stretched farther than she could see, but it was completely overrun with tall weeds and twisted trees. There was no house, no fence, no sign that a property had ever existed there, just an abandoned field under a sky beginning to darken. Jessica felt tears burn her eyes. She had spent her last resources on a useless trip. She didn't even have money to get back, and the next bus wouldn't come until the following morning. Ryan Michael was crying from hunger, and she had nothing left to offer him. She sat on the old suitcase and pulled out the black shawl she had worn to her husband's funeral, covering her head to protect herself from the evening dew that was beginning to fall. The baby finally fell asleep in her arms, exhausted from all the crying. The silence of the countryside was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant sound of running water. "What are we going to do now, Daniel?" she murmured into the void, as if her deceased husband could hear her prayers. "How will I take care of our son without a place to live?" The first raindrops began to fall when the night was already pitch black. Jessica had no choice but to improvise some shelter right there. With Ryan Michael still sleeping, she opened the suitcase and spread some clothes over low branches, creating a precarious protection against the intensifying rain. The water soon soaked the dry earth, forming puddles and streams that ran toward a depression in the ground. Desperate to protect the baby from the dampness, Jessica began digging with her hands, a small channel to divert the water away from where they were. The mud clung to her fingers, and she felt her nails breaking against stones and roots. It was then that her hand hit something solid and different. Even in the darkness, she could tell it wasn't a stone or a root. It was metal, something buried there a long time ago. With her heart racing, she dug with more determination, using a broken branch as a tool. The rain now helped her, softening the compacted earth. A few minutes later, she managed to pull out a rectangular, rusty metal box, the size of a shoebox, but heavy as if it contained documents or important objects. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. The box was locked with an old padlock, corroded by rust. Jessica shook it gently, hearing the sound of papers and small objects moving inside. Her hands trembled not just from the cold, but from an expectation she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was just trash buried by someone decades ago, but an inner voice insisted she had found something important. Using a sharp stone, she managed to break the padlock after several minutes of trying. The lid of the box resisted, but finally gave way with a metallic groan. Even with the faint moonlight between the clouds, Jessica could see the box was full of yellowed papers, photographs and small objects. Carefully, to avoid wetting the contents, she took the items and protected them under her shawl. Ryan Michael stirred with the movement, but remained quiet as if sensing the importance of that moment. Jessica decided to wait until morning to examine everything properly, but her curiosity was stronger than prudence. The first thing she saw in the light of her nearly dead phone was a black and white photograph of a young man embracing a woman of the same age. They were standing exactly where she was now, but the landscape behind them was completely different. There was a simple house, cultivated flower beds, and even some fruit trees that no longer existed. On the back of the photograph, a handwritten dedication, "To my dear godmother Eleanor, who taught me that family isn't just blood, but also heart. With eternal love and gratitude, Daniel Carter, 1995. The world seemed to stop around Jessica. That name, that handwriting, it was impossible, but at the same time it made perfect sense. Daniel had never mentioned a godmother named Eleanor, nor any connection to St. Benedict Valley. Why would he hide this from her? And why had his aunt left the land specifically to her? With her hands trembling even more, she picked up one of the letters. The paper was yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. It was correspondence dated just 2 years ago, addressed to Dear Eleanor, and signed by Your Godson, who never forgets. Jessica began to read, and each word was like a painful revelation about the man she thought she knew completely. Dear Godmother, as promised, I am sending this month's help. I know you don't like receiving money, but it's my duty to care for the person who saved me when I was just a lost boy. The construction business is going well, and soon I'll be able to buy the land back for you as we always dreamed. Jessica is pregnant, and I want my child to know the woman who taught me how to be a real man. I'll bring her to meet you soon. With all my love and respect, Daniel." The tears mixed with the rain on Jessica's face. Daniel had been sending money to this woman every month, for years, and he had never even mentioned her name. How many other secrets had her husband taken to the grave? She continued examining the letters. There were dozens of them, all following the same pattern. Daniel wrote about work, about plans for the future, about how eager he was to introduce his wife to his godmother. In an older letter, he mentioned he was saving money to buy the land back and turn it into a small farm where they could raise the child they hoped to have. In one of the photographs, Jessica immediately recognized Daniel's young face. He couldn't have been more than 17 or 18, but his eyes already had that gentle expression she knew so well. Beside him, a thin woman with graying hair smiled with maternal tenderness. In the background of the photo, the same land where Jessica now stood, but decades in the past when it was still a home. An even more shocking revelation came with a letter different from the others. It was older, dated 15 years ago, and in it, Daniel wrote about a difficult period in his adolescence. He mentioned he had run away from home at 14 after his adoptive father began physically abusing him. Eleanor had found him living on the streets and offered him shelter, work, and most importantly, unconditional love. You saved me, godmother. When everyone abandoned me, when I thought I had no worth in the world, you showed me I could be someone. I promise I will never let you go without, and that one day I will repay everything you did for me. Jessica finally understood why Daniel worked so many overtime hours, why he sometimes seemed worried about money, even when things were going well. He was supporting two families, the official one he had built with her and the one of his heart, represented by the woman who had saved him in his youth. And she also understood why Eleanor had left the land to her. It was the continuation of a promise of love that Daniel's sudden departure had interrupted. The baby began to cry again, and Jessica realized she needed to find proper shelter. The rain had eased, but the dawn dew was making everything damp and cold. She carefully placed the letters and photographs back into the metal box and looked for a more protected spot on the land. That's when she noticed a strange formation of stones near a sturdier tree. Approaching, she realized they were the remains of a foundation. Eleanor's house had stood there, and traces of the stone walls still remained. Among the ruins, she found a kind of natural shelter formed by two walls that were still standing, covered by intertwined branches that offered protection from the rain. Jessica settled there with Ryan Michael, using the clothes from the suitcase to make an improvised bed. The baby seemed to calm down in the more protected environment, and she managed to nurse him with the last drops of milk she still had. While he fell back asleep, she continued examining the contents of the mysterious box. Among the letters, she found important documents. There were old deeds to the land, which showed the property was much larger than it first appeared. What she thought was just an abandoned field actually stretched for nearly 10 hectares, including a water spring and a preserved riparian forest. Even more intriguing was a set of photographs showing the evolution of the place over the years. In the oldest one, from at least 40 years ago, the land housed a small, prosperous rural property with a vegetable garden, an orchard, and even some animals. The following photographs showed the gradual abandonment of the place, possibly due to Eleanor's aging and financial difficulties. A more recent letter, from just 6 months ago, brought disturbing revelations. Eleanor mentioned she was being pressured by people interested in buying the land for a very low price. She suspected there was something more behind these insistent offers, but couldn't figure out what. The letter ended with a desperate plea for Daniel to visit her soon, as she was feeling threatened. Jessica felt a tightness in her heart, realizing her husband had never received that letter. He had left before it arrived, and Eleanor had faced alone whatever pressure she was under. The woman had waited for help that never came, and was now passing the responsibility to someone who didn't even know of her existence. Dawn brought a thick fog that covered the entire valley. Jessica awoke with the first rays of sun filtering through the trees and felt physically sore from sleeping on the damp ground. Ryan Michael woke up crying from hunger, and she realized she urgently needed to find a way to feed him and also decide what to do with the unexpected inheritance. Walking around the land in daylight, she could better assess her situation. The place was truly isolated, with the nearest property at least 2 kilometers away. The dirt road leading there was in terrible condition, full of potholes and almost impassable for regular cars. There was no electricity or telephone line, and the silence was broken only by the sounds of nature. But there was also beauty in that abandonment. The spring running near the ruins of the house was crystal clear and abundant. The woods at the back of the property were home to colorful birds and small wild animals. The soil, though covered in weeds, seemed fertile and well drained. With work and investment, that place could become productive again. Jessica sat on a smooth stone near the spring and tried to organize her thoughts. She had no money to return to the city, nor to stay. She had no knowledge of agriculture or rural skills. She was alone with a 3-month-old baby in an isolated place with no food or resources. The situation seemed desperate from any angle. That's when she heard the sound of an engine approaching. She quickly hid the metal box among the clothes in her suitcase and picked up Ryan Michael, trying to appear more composed than she felt. An old jeep stopped at the entrance to the property, and from it stepped a man of about 60, tall and thin, with a stern expression. "What are you doing here?" he asked without any greeting, walking toward Jessica with determined steps. "I'm the new owner of the land," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nervousness. The man looked her up and down, pausing on the baby and the crumpled suitcase, clearly assessing the precarious situation she was in. Owner? Who says? I inherited it from Eleanor Carter. She was my aunt. Aunt? The man let out a disbelieving laugh. Eleanor had no family. She lived alone for decades, and I looked after her in recent years. She never mentioned any niece. I have the documents from the notary's office, insisted Jessica, though she was beginning to doubt herself. Documents can be forged. This land has many interested parties, and you wouldn't be the first person to show up here with questionable paperwork. The threatening tone in the man's voice frightened Jessica. She held Ryan Michael tightly against her chest and took a step back. I don't know what you're talking about. I received an official notification from the notary's office, traveled here, and found the property abandoned. Abandoned? This place is not abandoned. I've been taking care of this land since Eleanor passed. I plant a crop back there, keep the spring clean, scare off trespassers, and now you show up wanting to take over everything? I don't want to take anything. I just want to understand my rights. Your rights? The man moved closer, and Jessica felt the strong smell of alcohol on his breath, even though it was only mid-morning. You want to know about rights? Then you need to talk to Dr. Richard. He's buying up all the properties in the area, and I'm sure he's interested in this one too. Who is Dr. Richard? An important man who understands business. He offers a fair price for the land and handles all the bureaucratic problems. Much better than a lost young woman trying to manage alone with a baby in her arms. The way the man spoke made it clear he wasn't just giving advice, but making a kind of warning. Jessica realized her arrival hadn't gone as unnoticed as she'd thought, and that there were interests at play she didn't yet understand. I appreciate the information, but I need to calmly analyze my situation before making any decision. Calmly. The man looked around, as if showing the precariousness of the place. Girl, you're in the middle of nowhere. No power, no food, with a small child. What calm is that? The sensible thing would be to accept a good offer and leave here today. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. As I said, I need to think, and I don't plan on making any decision today. The man studied her for a few more seconds, clearly irritated by the response. Then he shrugged and started walking back to the jeep. Fine, but don't say you weren't warned. This place isn't safe for a woman alone. Sometimes dangerous people show up around here, folks who don't respect other people's property. And at night, well, at night it can be even worse. The veiled threat was delivered in a casual tone, but Jessica understood the message perfectly. She watched the jeep drive off, kicking up a cloud of dust, and felt real fear for the first time since she'd arrived. She wasn't just dealing with an abandoned property, but with something much more complicated. With Ryan crying again from hunger, she needed to make practical decisions immediately. First priority, find food for the baby. Second, better understand the legal situation of the property. Third, find out who this Dr. Richard was and why so many people were interested in seemingly worthless land in an isolated region. Walking back to the main road, Jessica stopped at the stall of the man who had sold fruit the day before. He was setting up his stand when she approached with the baby in her arms. Good morning. Yesterday we talked about Eleanor's property. Oh yes, the young lady with the inheritance. So, have you seen it's worthless? Actually, I have some questions. Did you know Mrs. Eleanor well? The fruit seller stopped what he was doing and looked at her more carefully. I did. She was a good person. Always bought my fruit, sometimes even on credit when money was tight. Died, poor thing, all alone. It was Mr. Charles who found the body. Mr. Charles, the closest neighbor. He's the one who takes care of her land now, or was taking care of it, right? If you really inherited... I think I met him this morning. Tall man, a bit rough around the edges. The vendor made a face. That's the one. He's not a bad person, but he's been drinking too much since his wife left him, and he's been acting kind of strange lately, talking about important business, big money. He mentioned someone named Dr. Richard. The man's expression changed immediately. He looked around as if making sure no one was listening. Miss, if I may give some advice, Be careful with this business. That so-called doctor showed up here a few months ago buying land from everyone. He offers a reasonable amount of money, handles all the paperwork, and people sell, but then what? Then they have nowhere to go. He buys the houses too, says it's for a big project, but nobody really knows what. Families leave the area, and everything becomes empty. At least 20 families have left in the last few months. And no one questioned this? Question who? The man has lawyers, has paperwork, everything in order, and he offers money that many people can't refuse. Life is hard around here, and cash in hand is a big temptation. Jessica absorbed this information as Ryan Michael tugged at her hair, restless. The situation was more complex than she had imagined. She had inherited a piece of land that was apparently at the center of some kind of real estate speculation or business project. Could you tell me where I can buy powdered milk for the baby? I ran out of what I brought from the city. Right here we have some, but it's a bit expensive. It all comes from outside. He looked at the state of her clothes and the damaged suitcase. Do you need help with money? The question was asked with genuine concern, and Jessica felt like crying at the unexpected kindness. I am in a difficult situation, yes. I spent my last resources to come here, and now I'm not sure how to get back. Look, I can lend you the milk for the child, but in return, will you take some advice? Sell that land quickly and go back to where you came from. I know it's none of my business, but I've seen a lot of people get into trouble because of these lands. And a young woman alone with a baby. What do you think could happen? I don't know exactly, but pressure is always a thing when big money is involved. And you look like someone who isn't prepared to handle pressure. Jessica thanked him for the borrowed powdered milk and promised to pay soon. Returning to the land, she felt torn between the practical need to resolve the situation quickly and a growing curiosity about the secrets the place held. Daniel's letters suggested there was much more history there than appeared on the surface. Back at the ruins of the old house, she prepared a bottle for Ryan Michael and managed to calm him temporarily. While the baby slept on an improvised bed of clothes, she went back to studying the documents found in the metal box. One of the old deeds mentioned that the land was part of a larger rural property that had been divided among several heirs decades ago. More intriguing was a hand-drawn map that showed not only the property boundaries but also strange markings at various points. Some were identified as main spring, secondary water source, and preserved woodland. Other markings had no identification, just small symbols she couldn't decipher. Following the map, Jessica made a more systematic exploration of the land. The first surprise was discovering there were not one, but 3 different springs at distinct points on the property. The water flowed clean and abundant, forming small streams that joined further ahead. For a region facing water difficulties due to climate change, this was a valuable resource. The second discovery was an old internal road, almost covered by vegetation, that led to a higher part of the land. Following it, Jessica reached a natural plateau with a panoramic view of the entire valley. From there, she could see the town in the distance and also realize that the land was truly extensive, much larger than she had initially calculated. But it was the third discovery that intrigued her the most. In a denser area of the woods, she found traces of old constructions that didn't appear in any photographs. They were just moss and dirt-covered stone foundations, but they suggested a significant structure had once stood there. Based on the shape and size of the foundations, it seemed to have been a large house or even a small farmstead. One of Daniel's letters mentioned that Eleanor kept stories about the property dating back to the last century, when it had belonged to an important family in the region. Perhaps these ruins were from that older period, before Eleanor arrived at the location. Returning to where she had left Ryan Michael, Jessica found an unpleasant surprise. A pickup truck was parked near the house ruins, and 2 men in suits were walking around the property as if conducting an inspection. One was photographing different spots with a professional camera, while the other was taking notes on a clipboard. "Excuse me," she shouted, running toward the baby she had left sleeping. "You are trespassing on private property." The men looked at her unhurriedly, clearly not feeling intimidated by the presence of a young woman alone. The one taking notes, a man in his 40s with graying hair and glasses, approached with a smile that tried to be friendly. "You must be the heir to the land. We're from Dr. Richard Hamilton's company. He asked us to evaluate the property with a view to a possible acquisition." I did not authorize any evaluation. And how did you know I was here? News travels fast in a small town. The doctor is interested in acquiring all the properties in this region for a sustainable development project. It's a unique opportunity for owners to receive a fair value for their land. What kind of project? A modern agro-industrial complex that will generate jobs for the entire region. The doctor is a visionary. He wants to transform this valley into a benchmark for sustainable agribusiness. The other man, younger and with a less cordial appearance, interrupted the conversation. Dr. Richard is prepared to make a generous offer for the property, well above market value for land in these conditions. I'm not interested in selling now. I just inherited the property and haven't even fully understood what I have. We understand perfectly, said the man with glasses, maintaining a diplomatic tone, but perhaps it would be interesting to hear our proposal. $50,000 cash, with all the documentation handled by us. You could leave here today with the money in hand. Jessica felt her breathing quicken. $50,000 was more money than Daniel had earned in 2 years of work. It was enough to pay off all the debts left by his death, find decent housing, and secure Ryan Michael's future for a good while. It's a tempting offer, but I need to think. Of course, but you can't take too long. We have other properties to negotiate in the region, and the doctor is in a hurry to close all the acquisitions. If you wait too long, the offer might not stand. The polite tone didn't disguise the pressure they were exerting. Jessica realized this wasn't the first time they had made this kind of approach. Where can I find this Dr. Richard to talk in person? The two men exchanged a quick glance before answering. The doctor is very busy, travels constantly, but we can schedule a meeting for next week if you're interested. And if I accept the proposal today, that would be different. The doctor would make a point of coming personally to close the deal. He could be here this very afternoon. The pressure was becoming too obvious. They wanted a quick decision without giving her time to research or reflect properly. Jessica decided to buy time. I'll think about the proposal and give you an answer tomorrow. Where can I reach you? The man with glasses handed over an elegant business card. That's our office in the city, but it would be best if you decided soon. As I said, other properties are being negotiated and the project has a deadline to start. After they left, Jessica examined the card. Richard Hamilton, Real Estate Development and Agribusiness. The address was in a larger city, about 100 kilometers away. The phone number had a New York area code, suggesting the company's reach extended far beyond the local region. $50,000 was a lot of money for someone in her situation, but something about the men and their approach set off alarms in her head. Why the rush? Why wouldn't they let her meet the doctor in person before deciding? And why would a businessman from New York be specifically interested in that seemingly worthless piece of land? Daniel's letters might contain more clues. She read them again with extra care, searching for any mention about the property's hidden value. In a letter from 3 years ago, he commented that Eleanor had refused a purchase offer from outsiders who wanted the land for business she didn't trust. Another, more recent letter mentioned that Eleanor was worried about strange activity in the area. She had noticed unfamiliar cars driving on the rural roads and people asking questions about the local properties. Daniel reassured her, saying it was probably just normal real estate speculation. But the most revealing letter was one Eleanor had written to Daniel and never sent. Jessica found it at the bottom of the box, still in its sealed envelope. With trembling hands, she opened it and read, "My dear godson, I am very worried and need to share this with someone I trust. Men have appeared here offering money for the land, but they knew things about the property that I have never told anyone. They knew about the springs, the preserved forest, even the old ruins on top of the hill. How could they know these things if they've never set foot here before? I'm afraid they've done some kind of investigation without my permission. The money they offer is too much for common land, and that makes me suspicious. You always said true family is the one that protects each other, so I'm asking for your help. Come as soon as you can. I need to talk to you in person." The letter was dated just 1 month before Daniel's departure. Eleanor had sensed something wasn't right and had asked for help from the very person who could no longer respond. Jessica felt a tremendous responsibility falling on her shoulders. She had inherited not just a piece of land, but also a problem her aunt couldn't solve alone. Ryan Michael woke up crying, and she realized it was already getting dark. She had no more food to prepare any meal, and was beginning to feel the effects of hunger. The milk borrowed from the fruit vendor would only be enough for 2 more bottles, and after that she didn't know how she would feed her son. The offer of $50,000 echoed in her mind like a powerful temptation. With that money, she could immediately solve all her practical problems and give Ryan Michael a secure future. But at the same time, she felt that accepting would be a betrayal of the trust Eleanor and Daniel had placed in her, both now gone and depending on her to protect something important. She decided to spend one more night on the property and make her final decision in the morning. If she could discover more about the mystery surrounding the property, perhaps she could find a way out that didn't involve simply selling to those who were pressuring her. During the night, she was awakened several times by strange noises, cars passing slowly on the road as if they were watching the property, distant voices talking in low tones. Once, she was sure she had seen a lantern moving in the woods, but when she looked again, there was nothing. Ryan Michael was also restless, crying more than usual and refusing to sleep for long periods. It was as if he could sense the tension she was facing. Jessica Carter soothed him by softly humming the same songs Daniel used to sing, trying to stay calm as nighttime fears assaulted her mind. The next morning, she was awakened by nearby voices. Peering through the branches that served as protection for her makeshift shelter, she saw 3 people talking near the entrance to the property, Mr. Charles and 2 men she didn't know. "The young lady is stubborn, but she won't last long here," said Charles. "She has no means to stay isolated with a baby. A few more days and she'll accept any offer." "The doctor is getting impatient," replied one of the men. "This property is the missing piece of the puzzle. Without it, the whole project is compromised." "Why don't you increase the offer?" suggested the other. "It's not about money. We've already offered more than a fair price. The issue is she might start asking questions, investigating, and it's not wise to draw attention to this project before the right time." Jessica felt a chill hearing the conversation. They were clearly planning some kind of additional pressure to force her to sell quickly. She remained motionless until the men left, then waited another half-hour before moving with Ryan Michael to a better hiding place. The situation was becoming unsustainable. She didn't have the resources to stay, but she was also starting to suspect she shouldn't sell to those people. She needed outside help, someone who could guide her legally and perhaps investigate what was really happening in the region. It was then she remembered a piece of information in Daniel's letters. In one of them, he mentioned he had consulted a friend who was an attorney about the property documentation, someone who understood rural issues. The name was attorney Marcus Thompson, and he practiced in the neighboring town of St. Joseph Hills. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. With Ryan Michael in her arms and a suitcase in one hand, Jessica walked to the main road and managed to get a ride in a truck heading to St. Joseph Hills. The driver, a kind, middle-aged man, didn't charge anything for the ride when he saw her situation. "Miss, with all due respect, but you don't look like you're doing well," he commented during the trip. "Are you running from some trouble?" "Not exactly running, but facing a complicated situation. I need legal guidance about an inheritance." "Ah, inheritance always causes trouble, especially when money is involved. I've seen families fall apart over land and houses." "Do you know the St. Benedict Valley region?" "Yes, I do. I pass through there regularly with the truck. Beautiful place, but lately it's been strange. Lots of people selling property and leaving the area. They say it's all going to become agribusiness, but nobody really knows what kind." "Are people happy with the changes?" "Some are, those who managed to sell well and move to the city. Others are a bit bitter, saying they were pressured to sell even when they didn't want to. But that's how it is, right? Progress affects everyone." In St. Joseph Hills, Jessica managed to locate attorney Marcus Thompson's office. It was a simple building in the town center with a discreet sign at the entrance. The secretary, a bespectacled lady, received her kindly, despite her not having an appointment. Attorney Marcus is in court now, but if you'd like to wait, he can see you in about 40 minutes. Jessica agreed to wait. Ryan Michael was calm, and she used the time to organize the documents she had brought from the metal box. She wanted to present the case as clearly as possible, hoping the attorney could clarify her doubts about the inheritance and the strange situation she found herself in. When she was finally called into Attorney Marcus's office, Jessica was surprised by his reaction upon hearing the name Daniel Carter. Daniel Carter, the young man who worked in construction. Of course I remember him. An excellent person, always very proper in our conversations. The attorney's expression turned serious. I heard about the accident. A very sad loss. You are the widow? Yes. And I'm here because I inherited a piece of land from an aunt he knew. From what I've discovered, he even consulted you about the property. Attorney Marcus nodded slowly. Eleanor Carter's property, yes. Daniel came to me a few months ago, concerned about pressures she was facing to sell the land. He wanted to know about her rights and if there was any way to protect her from predatory offers. And was there? In theory, yes. But in practice, it's always complicated. Daniel brought me some property documents, and I was surprised by what I found. The attorney stood up and went to a filing cabinet, from which he pulled a folder. I keep a copy of the documents he showed me. Eleanor's property is much more valuable than it appears on the surface. Why? First, because of the water resources. There are 3 perennial springs in a region that is facing water scarcity. Second, because of its strategic location in a planned urban expansion area. And third, he hesitated, because of historical and environmental issues that could prevent certain types of development. What issues? The property includes a protected riparian forest area and also unofficially catalogued archaeological sites. Daniel had mentioned that Eleanor knew of old ruins on the land, possibly from a colonial farm. If confirmed, this could generate very specific legal restrictions. Jessica felt her heart race. The ruins she had found on the property weren't just historical curiosities, but potential instruments for the legal protection of the land. Attorney Marcus, if someone wanted to develop a large project in that region, would these issues be a problem? They would be a huge problem. That's precisely why anyone with a commercial interest in the area prefers to buy the properties before these issues are formalized. Once you sell, the new owner can decide not to mention the existence of archaeological sites or environmental issues. And if I don't want to sell, then the story changes. You have the right to request official studies on the area's archaeological and environmental heritage. If the suspicions are confirmed, your property could become a site of historical interest, which would drastically limit any commercial development. But would that also limit my right to use the land? It would limit certain uses, but it would open others. Properties with historical and environmental value can receive tax incentives, special financing for rural tourism, partnerships with universities for research. There are many possibilities beyond a simple sale. Jessica absorbed this information with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Perhaps there was a way out that didn't involve accepting the pressures she was facing. Doctor, if I decide to investigate these issues, could you guide me through the process? Of course. Daniel was a good man and I would be honored to help his family. But I must warn you, if there are really major commercial interests behind these purchase offers, you may face serious pressures. I'm not talking about violence, but legal, bureaucratic, financial pressure. What kind of pressure? Questions about the inheritance paperwork, claims of irregularities, tempting offers followed by threats of expropriation, creating difficulties to access the property. In short, ways to make your life difficult until you agree to sell. And if that happens, then we defend ourselves. But it's important you know what you're getting into before you decide. A young woman alone with a baby might think it's more worthwhile to accept 50,000 Rs and have peace. Jessica looked at Ryan Michael, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. That was exactly the decision she needed to make. Accept the money and the peace, or fight for something she didn't fully understand yet. But that could be much more important. Doctor, can I ask a personal question? If it were your daughter in my situation, what advice would you give? Attorney Marcus took off his glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully. As a father, I'd say to accept the money and start a new life away from these problems. As a lawyer, I'd say to investigate first and decide later. As someone who knew Daniel and saw his character, I'd say to honor the trust that Eleanor placed in you by leaving the property as an inheritance. The trust? Daniel told me that Eleanor was a very intuitive person who did nothing by chance. If she left the land specifically to you, even without knowing you, it's because she knew you would make the right decisions. Maybe not the easiest ones, but the right ones. Jessica left the attorney's office with more questions than answers, but also with a feeling that she was on the right path. Attorney Marcus had offered to provide legal representation without charging upfront fees, a gesture of kindness that moved her deeply. Back in St. Benedict Valley, she found strange activity at the entrance to the property. There were tire marks from several different cars, and also some makeshift signs stuck in the ground with phrases like "property under negotiation" and "entry forbidden, area under assessment." Jessica angrily pulled up the signs and threw them away. No one had authorized that, and she was beginning to understand that the pressure to sell would increase significantly. They were trying to create a fait accompli, as if the sale were already inevitable. That night, she made a decision that would completely change the course of the story. Instead of continuing to sleep in the ruins of the old house, she set up her makeshift shelter right on top of the archaeological ruins she had discovered at the top of the hill. If Attorney Marcus was right about the site's historical importance, she would literally be sleeping on the proof that could protect her inheritance. It was a cold and uncomfortable night, but for the first time since she had arrived, Jessica felt she was doing something proactive, instead of just reacting to external pressures. Ryan Michaels slept better than on previous nights, as if he also felt the greater security of being in a strategic location. The next morning, she was awakened by raised voices near the property entrance. Carrying the baby, she carefully descended the overgrown trail to a point where she could observe without being seen. There were at least 5 men talking agitatedly: Mr. Charles, the 2 men in suits who had made the purchase offer, and 2 others she didn't recognize. One of them, better dressed and apparently older, seemed to be the group's leader. "This situation should have been resolved already," said the well-dressed man in an irritated tone. "We can't give her any more time to think. The project timeline cannot be compromised because of a complicated inheritance." "Doctor, Richard, the young lady seems more stubborn than we expected," replied one of the men in suits. "And yesterday we found out she sought out a lawyer in St. Joseph Hills. So that was the famous Dr. Richard." Jessica studied him intently. A man of approximately 55 years, well-groomed grey hair, expensive suits, the posture of someone accustomed to having his orders obeyed without question. He was definitely not a local businessman, but someone with far more resources and influence. "What lawyer?" asked Richard. "Marcus Thompson." He had already been consulted by her husband before the accident. Richard's expression changed visibly. "Thompson is a problem. He knows historical preservation and environmental legislation very well. If he starts digging into this property, could it be an obstacle for the project? It could be a multi-million-dollar obstacle." Richard paced nervously back and forth. "We need to accelerate the resolution of this matter. Charles, are you sure she's out of money?" "Absolutely sure. She doesn't even have enough to eat properly, let alone sustain an expensive lawyer." "Then let's use that. We make a final offer, $100,000, but with a 24-hour deadline to accept. If she refuses, we start applying pressure through other channels." "What other channels?" asked one of the men. "Contesting the inheritance, alleging irregularities in the documentation, questioning her capacity to manage a property. We have several tools. The important thing is that she understands she only has 2 options: accept our money or face years of legal proceedings with no guarantee of winning." Jessica felt a knot in her stomach. They were planning a coordinated campaign of legal and financial pressure to force her to sell, and by the tone of the conversation, they had abundant resources to sustain a war of attrition that she couldn't possibly win alone. But at the same time, the conversation confirmed her suspicions that the property was far more valuable than it appeared. No one would invest so much time and resources to acquire a common piece of land for $100,000. There was something about that land worth much more than that. The men dispersed, and Jessica returned to her hiding spot atop the hill. She needed to make quick decisions, but now she had crucial information. They had increased the offer to $100,000 and given a 24-hour deadline. That meant they were truly in a hurry, and that her resistance was causing problems for them. The question was she in any position to withstand coordinated legal pressure? With a 3-month-old baby, no money and no resources, facing wealthy businessmen in legal matters seemed like financial suicide. But if Attorney Marcus was right about the property's historical and environmental value, perhaps there was a way to turn this into a more balanced fight. During the afternoon, she conducted a more detailed exploration of the archaeological ruins. With the help of the hand-drawn map she had found in the metal box, she managed to locate not only the stone foundations she had seen superficially, but also other structures buried across a much larger area. What she discovered left her speechless. The ruins were not of a simple house, but of a complex of buildings that included what appeared to be a main house, slave quarters, a mill, and even a chapel. Given the dimensions and the quality of the stonework, this had been an important estate, possibly from the colonial or imperial period. More importantly, she found fragments of pottery, old tools, and even a bronze coin corroded by time. She wasn't an archaeology expert, but she knew this kind of find could have great historical and scientific value. She photographed everything with her phone and decided she would send the images to Attorney Marcus that same day. If her suspicions were correct, those objects could be the key to protecting the property from any inappropriate commercial development. Ryan Michael was calmer, perhaps getting used to the unlikely routine they were living. She managed to feed him properly and even give him an improvised bath using water from the nearest spring. The baby seemed to enjoy the fresh, clean water, and she noticed he was less fussy since they had arrived at the spot. That evening, she prepared herself for what she imagined would be a difficult conversation the next day. Richard and his men would return with the offer of 100,000 reais and the demand for an immediate answer. She needed to be prepared not only to refuse, but to show that she knew exactly what kind of pressure she was dealing with. But before sleeping, she had an unexpected surprise. A woman of about 40 appeared, walking along the trail that led to the property, carrying a bag of groceries. Jessica watched her cautiously until the woman called out, "Hi, I'm Rebecca. I live on the property next door. I brought a few things for you." Jessica came down from the hill, carrying Ryan Michael, and approached the visitor. Rebecca was a simple woman with a pretty face marked by outdoor work, and she had a genuinely concerned expression. "I heard you're camped out here with the baby. It's no place to be alone at night." "I don't have many options at the moment. I'm trying to settle the inheritance matter." Rebecca looked around, noting the precariousness of the situation. "Look, I don't make a habit of meddling in other people's lives, but if you want, you can sleep at my house until you sort things out. I have a spare room and a crib my youngest doesn't use anymore." The offer caught Jessica completely off guard. It had been so long since she had encountered selfless kindness that she almost burst into tears. "That's very kind of you, but I don't want to be a bother." "It's no bother. It's good neighborliness. And besides," Rebecca lowered her voice, "there are some things going on around here that you need to know about." "What kind of things?" "Pressure to sell land, strange people hanging around, families leaving the area. My husband works at the town hall and hears things. It seems there's a big project for this area, but no one explains exactly what." "Have you and your husband been approached to sell?" "We have. They offered good money, but our land is a family inheritance. No amount of money can pay for the memories we have here. But many neighbors sold and regretted it later." "Why?" "Because they found out the money wasn't so good when they tried to buy another property. Prices have gone up all over the region, as if someone were manipulating the market. Those who sold were left with nowhere to go with the money they received." Jessica accepted the offer of shelter at Rebecca's house, mainly thinking of Ryan Michael's well-being. The house was simple but clean and cozy, with a kitchen that smelled of home cooking and a yard where chickens pecked freely. Rebecca's husband, Joseph Charles, arrived from work at the town hall carrying troubling information. "I heard you're the heir to Mrs. Eleanor's land." You should know that a lawyer showed up at the registry office this morning questioning the inheritance documentation. Questioning how? Claiming irregularities in the will, problems with overdue taxes, that sort of thing. The registrar told me because he thought it was strange. He said the documentation was perfect when it was filed, but now all these challenges have appeared at once. Can they nullify the inheritance? I don't know. I don't understand the law, but the registrar said you should find a lawyer urgently, because these challenges could complicate any attempt to sell or use the land. Jessica realized she was in the middle of a carefully planned trap. While they were offering tempting money for the property, they were also creating legal problems that could make any other option unviable. It was a sophisticated pressure strategy designed to force her to accept the sale as the only way out. During dinner, Joseph Charles revealed more details about the mysterious project. From what I heard in conversations at the City Hall, they want to make a kind of industrial district disguised as agribusiness. A lot of land, few jobs for the local population, but a lot of profit for those funding it. And the City Hall supports it? Officially, yes, because they promise taxes and jobs. But unofficially, there are people inside who are suspicious. The project is too big for the region, and they haven't presented environmental impact studies yet. Rebecca told me several families sold and regretted it. Exactly. The money seemed good at the time, but when they tried to re-establish themselves elsewhere, they found they couldn't buy anything equivalent to what they had. And that raises the question, if our lands aren't worth much, why are they paying so well for them? That was precisely the central issue. Jessica was beginning to understand this wasn't just about common real estate speculation, but a much larger project that needed an extensive, continuous area. Her property, for some reason, was a strategic piece in this puzzle. The next morning, as expected, Richard and his men showed up at Rebecca's house looking for Jessica. She received them on the porch, with Ryan Michael in her arms and Rebecca by her side as a witness. "Mrs. Carter, we've come to present our final offer," said Richard with a smile that tried to be cordial but couldn't hide his impatience. $100,000 cash, documentation on us with no burden to you. It's a generous offer, but I've decided not to sell at this time. I understand your position, but I need to inform you about some complications that have arisen. Richard took a folder from his briefcase. We discovered irregularities in the inheritance documentation, back taxes, problems with the property registration, issues that could take years to resolve in court. What irregularities? Technical details our legal department identified. If you insist on keeping the property, you'll have to resolve these issues first, which could cost much more than the land's value. And if I agree to sell to you? We assume all legal complications. You receive the money clean and with no future worries. It was elegant blackmail, but blackmail nonetheless. They were offering to solve problems they themselves had created in exchange for the property. I need to speak with my attorney before making any decision. Richard's expression hardened slightly. Ma'am, our deadline is today. Tomorrow the offer will no longer be available, and you'll have to deal with the legal complications alone. Rebecca, who had remained quiet, decided to intervene. Doctor, with all due respect, the young lady has the right to consult an attorney before signing anything. It's too important a decision to be made in haste. You don't understand the situation. Richard looked at Rebecca with poorly disguised irritation. This is a commercial matter that doesn't involve third parties. It does involve us, because this region is our home. And you've been buying land from everyone without properly explaining what for. We are not obligated to explain our business projects to anyone who's curious. The tension was escalating, and Jessica realized it wasn't the moment for direct confrontation. Dr. Richard, I appreciate the offer, but I maintain my decision to consult an attorney first. If after the consultation I decide to sell, I will get in touch. Richard looked at her for a few seconds, as if assessing how far he could push without causing bigger problems. Very well. But starting tomorrow, our company will not be responsible for any legal complications that may arise regarding the property, and I can guarantee there will be many. After they left, Rebecca shook her head worriedly. These men are not playing around. They're going to make life very difficult for you. I know, but something tells me selling now would be the biggest mistake of my life. What are you going to do? I'm going to talk to Attorney Marcus and decide if it's worth fighting for. But first, I want to better understand what's so special about the property that they're willing to pay 100,000 rees for a seemingly worthless piece of land. That afternoon, Jessica went back to the land accompanied by Rebecca. She wanted to show her neighbor the archaeological ruins she had discovered and get a second opinion on their importance. Rebecca's reaction was even stronger than her own. "My God, Jessica, this is an entire colonial farm. My grandfather always told stories about a large farm that existed in this region a long time ago, but we thought it was a legend." "Your grandfather knew the history of the place?" "Yes, he did. He said this was one of the first farms in the region from the time of the pioneers. The owner was very wealthy and had many slaves. When slavery ended, the farm fell into decay and was abandoned." "And what happened to the family?" "They left for the big city, and the lands were sold off in small pieces to settlers. My grandfather said many people searched for buried treasures here, but never found anything." "Treasures?" "Buried money, gold, those kinds of things wealthy landowners hid. But perhaps the real treasure is all this preserved history." Jessica looked at the ruins again with new eyes. If Rebecca was right, this wasn't just an interesting archaeological site, but a place of great importance for regional history, and that could be exactly the kind of legal protection she needed against Richard's pressures. That same afternoon, she called Attorney Marcus and told him about the archaeological discoveries. The lawyer's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Jessica, this could completely change your legal situation. If we confirm there's an archaeological site of historical value on the property, any commercial development will be severely limited." "How do we confirm this officially?" "We need to contact the NHPA, the National Historic Preservation Agency. They can send a team to do a preliminary assessment. If they confirm the historical importance, your property gains legal protection automatically." "How long does that take?" "The preliminary assessment, a few days. The full process, a few months. But as soon as we officially request the assessment, any attempt to alter the area is suspended until the final result. And the legal problems they created with the inheritance documentation, they're pressure tactics. I'll contest every claim and I can guarantee your inheritance is perfectly legal. They know this, but they're betting you don't have the resources to defend yourself." "Attorney Marcus, can I ask a direct question? If I manage to preserve the property, is there any way for it to generate income without compromising the archaeological site?" "There are several: historical tourism, environmental education, university research, sustainable agriculture. Properties with preserved historical heritage can be much more profitable in the long run than common commercial development. So it's worth fighting for?" "It's very much worth it, especially considering you'd be honoring Daniel's memory and protecting something important for the region." Jessica hung up the phone with a feeling of relief and determination she hadn't felt in weeks. She had finally found a clear direction to follow. It wouldn't be easy, but at least now she had a strategy and legal support. Rebecca welcomed her for a few more days, while Attorney Marcus began the legal proceedings. During this period, Jessica met other neighbors who had resisted the sales pressures. She discovered there was an informal network of mutual support among the families who had decided to remain in the region. Joseph Charles brought crucial information from the City Hall. Richard's project was facing difficulties obtaining environmental permits, precisely because the area included springs and preserved forests. The resistance from some families was complicating the continuity of the plans, and there was political pressure for the project to be re-evaluated. 1 week after the refusal of the 100,000 reis proposal, Attorney Marcus brought important news. The NHPA had confirmed interest in evaluating the archaeological site and would send a team of specialists the following week. Meanwhile, any alteration in the area was officially suspended by court order. Richard tried a few more pressures, including an increased proposal for 150,000 reis, but now Jessica had legal protection and community support. She could negotiate from a position of strength, not of desperation. The NHPA evaluation confirmed that the ruins were of an 18th century colonial farm of great historical importance to the region. The site was officially registered as a historic property, guaranteeing permanent protection against inappropriate development. But the biggest surprise came when the team of archaeologists made deeper excavations. Among the objects found, there were documents preserved in a metal box similar to the one Jessica had initially found. The documents revealed that the original farm had belonged to a family of pioneering explorers in the region, and that the location had served as a stopping point for important historical expeditions. Attorney Marcus explained that this discovery drastically increased the cultural value of the property. The government offered substantial financial incentives to transform the location into a historical research and tourism center. Universities showed interest in establishing partnerships for continued archaeological studies. Jessica realized she had made the right decision. Instead of accepting 100,000 riets for a quick sale, she now had a legally protected property, with the potential for long-term income generation, and most importantly, the awareness of having preserved something important for future generations. Richard's project was officially cancelled after the legal protection of the property made the continuous area he needed unfeasible. He still tried astronomical offers for other properties, but the community was now organized and informed about their rights. Rebecca and Joseph Charles became great friends and partners in developing the historical tourism project. Rebecca discovered a talent for receiving visitors and telling the region's history, while Joseph Charles used his knowledge from City Hall to facilitate permits and institutional partnerships. Ryan Michael grew up happy in the rural environment, surrounded by people who became extended family. Jessica built a simple but comfortable house near the archaeological ruins, funded by the first resources from the historical tourism project. 6 months after the desperate arrival at that seemingly worthless land, Jessica was managing a prosperous historical research and tourism center. She received researchers, students, and tourists interested in the colonial history of the region. The property generated stable and growing income while fully preserving its historical and environmental value. The story of her struggle against commercial pressures became known regionally, inspiring other communities to investigate and protect their historical heritage. Attorney Marcus commented that it had been one of the most rewarding victories of his career, proving that the highest monetary offer was not always the best option. In one of the letters that Daniel had written to Eleanor, he mentioned the dream of turning that land into a place where people could learn about history and connect with nature. Unknowingly, Jessica had fulfilled the very vision her husband and his godmother had shared for the property. During the archaeological excavations, a third metal box was found buried near the main house of the colonial farm. This time, the contents included personal belongings of the original family and also documents that told the complete history of the property over the centuries. One of the most moving documents was a letter written by the last owner of the farm before its abandonment. In it, he expressed hope that one day someone would return to the site and restore its historical importance. It was as if Jessica had been chosen by fate to fulfill a mission that had begun long before her birth. The transformation of the property attracted attention from other investors interested in sustainable tourism. Jessica received partnership proposals to expand the project, always maintaining the commitment to preserve the historical and environmental character of the place. Ryan Michael, who had arrived on that land as a crying, malnourished baby, was now a healthy, happy child who played among the archaeological ruins as if they were his natural playground. He grew up hearing stories about explorers and colonial farmers, developing from a young age a deep connection with the history of the land where he lived. Jessica often sat near the water spring, in the same spot where she had spent the first desperate night, and reflected on the unbelievable journey her life had taken. From a widow with no resources and no hope, she had become the owner of a thriving historical estate and the manager of a project that benefited the entire community. The neighbor Rebecca became a partner in the tourism project and discovered a calling for historical research. She began documenting the oral histories of the oldest residents of the region, creating an archive of memories that complemented the archaeological discoveries. Joseph Charles left his job at the City Hall to dedicate himself fully to managing the historical tourism center. Attorney Marcus became the project's permanent legal advisor and also a personal friend of the family. He commented that the case had changed his professional perspective, showing that some legal victories were far more important than high fees. The land that seemed vacant and worthless turned out to be one of the most important historical assets in the region. Eleanor's property not only survived commercial pressures, but transformed into a benchmark for historical preservation and sustainable development. Jessica never knew for sure if Eleanor had been aware of the property's historical value when she left it as an inheritance. But she was certain that the decision had been made with wisdom and love, ensuring that the land's legacy was preserved for future generations. Richard and his company eventually left the region after the project's failure. But his attempt at inappropriate commercial appropriation had an unintended positive effect. It alerted the entire community about the importance of protecting its historical and natural heritage against predatory speculation. Jessica's story became an example frequently cited in discussions about sustainable development and heritage protection. She received invitations to share her experience at seminars and conferences, always emphasizing that small communities have the power to protect their heritage when they organize and seek proper information. Ryan Michael grew up surrounded by living history. By age 5, he already knew the names of the archaeologists who visited the property and could explain to tourists the difference between objects from the colonial period and the imperial period. His playground was 300-year-old ruins, and he considered it completely normal to play in places where generations of children had played before him. The property expanded through partnerships with neighbors who decided to integrate their lands into the historical tourism project. Instead of selling to speculators, they discovered they could generate income by retaining ownership of their properties and participating in a community-led sustainable development project. The property's water springs became the subject of university studies on water resource management for small rural estates. The abundant, crystal-clear water not only supplied the tourism center, but also served as a model of environmental preservation for other communities in the region. Jessica Carter established a preservation fund financed by the revenue from historical tourism. The fund ensured permanent resources for the maintenance of the archaeological site and also offered scholarships to local youth interested in history and archaeology. The old metal box where she had found Daniel's letters became a piece in the improvised museum that operated on the property. Visitors were moved to hear the story of how those letters had revealed the connection between Daniel and Eleanor, and how that discovery had changed the destiny of the entire region. Attorney Marcus Thompson developed a community legal advisory program offering free guidance to small landowners on how to protect their lands from predatory speculation. The program spread to other rural regions, multiplying the positive effects of Jessica's victory against commercial pressures. Rebecca specialized in regional history and began writing a book about the area's colonial farms. Her research revealed there were at least 3 other archaeological sites in the region, deserving protection and study. Her work attracted interest from universities and historical research institutions. Joseph Charles developed expertise in sustainable tourism management and began advising other rural communities interested in developing similar projects. He created a replicable methodology for transforming local historical heritage into a source of community income. The Historical Tourism Center received official recognition as a model of sustainable development for small rural communities. Jessica was invited to join governmental councils on historical heritage and rural development, bringing the voice of small communities to political decision-making bodies. Ryan Michael, now 7 years old, had become the property's little ambassador. He would receive student groups, tell stories about the colonial farm, and explain the importance of preserving history. His genuine enthusiasm for local history charmed visitors and researchers alike. The preserved forest on the property became an area for studies on regional biodiversity. Biologists discovered species of plants and animals that had disappeared in other areas due to intensive agricultural development. The preservation of the archaeological site had, inadvertently, also preserved a unique ecosystem. Jessica established partnerships with regional schools for historical and environmental education programs. Children and teenagers regularly visited the property, learning about colonial history, archaeology, and environmental preservation through hands-on experiences. Continued archaeological discoveries revealed that the colonial farm had been an important agricultural production center and also a support point for bandeirante expeditions. Some of the objects found held national historical value, attracting researchers from universities across the country. The tourism project generated direct and indirect jobs for dozens of families in the region. Local guides, artisan producers, food suppliers, and various service providers benefited from the flow of visitors attracted by the history preserved on the property. Jessica Carter implemented a historical agriculture program, cultivating plant species that were used on the original colonial farm. The project attracted interest from agricultural history researchers and also became an additional source of income through the sale of traditional organic products. The story of Jessica's resistance to commercial pressures inspired the creation of a regional network for protecting rural historical heritage. Small landowners began organizing to identify and protect sites of historical value on their properties, multiplying the effects of the original archaeological discovery. Attorney Marcus Thompson documented the entire legal process of protecting the property and created a practical guide for other lawyers to handle similar cases. The material became a reference in law courses on historical heritage and land issues on small properties. The project's success caught the attention of international organizations interested in sustainable development in small rural communities. Jessica received invitations to present the experience at conferences abroad, promoting the Brazilian model of community heritage preservation. The property became a reference center for interdisciplinary research, bringing together archaeologists, historians, biologists, sociologists, and rural development specialists. The interaction between different areas of knowledge generated innovative insights on integrated heritage preservation. Ryan Michael began developing an interest in archaeology and history, influenced by the environment in which he was growing up. By age 8, he was already participating in supervised excavations and demonstrating a natural ability to identify historical objects. Researchers joked that he would be the next generation of guardians of the local historical heritage. The property's springs became the subject of a pilot project for sustainable water resource management on rural properties. The experience developed there was replicated in other regions facing water scarcity problems, demonstrating that environmental preservation and economic development can be compatible. Jessica established an exchange program with rural communities in other countries that had developed similar historical preservation projects. The exchange of experiences enriched the project and created an international support network for sustainable development in small communities. The old road that led to the colonial farm was restored while respecting its original historical characteristics. The road became part of the tourist experience, allowing visitors to travel the same route used by the farm's residents 3 centuries ago. Rebecca completed her book on the colonial farms of the region, and its launch became an important cultural event for the entire area. The book not only documented local history, but also served as a source of pride and cultural identity for the region's residents. Joseph Charles created a rural historical tourism cooperative that included several properties in the region. The cooperative strengthened Jessica's individual project and also created a broader tourist circuit, attracting visitors who stayed longer in the region. The Historical Tourism Center developed a specific educational program for seniors, offering cultural and historical experiences adapted for elderly visitors. The program became very popular and attracted groups of retirees from various cities in the region. Attorney Marcus established a permanent office in the region to handle the legal demands generated by the growth of historical tourism and heritage protection issues. His presence strengthened the legal security of the entire project and also provided accessible legal services for the local community. Ongoing archaeological discoveries revealed that the property had served as an informal school for children in the region during the imperial period. School supplies and antique toys were found, creating an even stronger emotional connection between the past and present of local education. Jessica Carter developed a mentorship program for other women facing similar pressure to sell rural properties. The program offered legal, emotional, and practical support, helping others explore alternatives to the hasty sale of their land. The project attracted interest from documentary producers and television programs about historic preservation. Jessica's story was told in various media outlets, inspiring other communities to value and protect their local historical heritage. Ryan Michael began participating in school history knowledge competitions, always standing out due to his practical knowledge of colonial history. He became a minor local celebrity, even being consulted by adults about the region's historical questions. The property established partnerships with regional museums for the exchange of collections and knowledge. Some archaeological artifacts found on the property were loaned for museum exhibitions, bringing local history to an even wider audience. The sustainable farming techniques developed on the property, based on historical methods adapted with modern knowledge, became a subject of study for organic agriculture researchers. The project demonstrated that ancient practices can be relevant to contemporary agricultural challenges. Jessica created a scholarship fund for students from rural families interested in higher education courses related to history, archaeology, tourism, and sustainable development. The fund ensured that the knowledge developed in the region could be perpetuated through new generations. The experience of preserving the property influenced municipal and state public policies on the protection of rural historical heritage. Jessica began to be consulted by public managers interested in developing more effective heritage protection legislation. The Historical Tourism Center developed a volunteer program that attracted university students and researchers from various parts of the country. The volunteers contributed with research and work, while gaining practical experience in historic preservation and community development. Rebecca became a recognized expert in regional oral history and began advising other memory preservation projects in small rural communities. Her work demonstrated the importance of recording and valuing the stories told by the oldest residents. Joseph Charles developed innovative methodologies for participatory management in rural tourism projects, ensuring that economic benefits were distributed equitably among all participants. His methodologies were adopted by other rural development projects in the country. The property became the headquarters for a longitudinal research program on sustainability in small rural communities. Researchers from various universities tracked the project's development over the years, documenting its social, economic, and environmental impacts. Attorney Marcus Thompson created a popular legal clinic specialized in rural issues, offering free legal services to small producers and traditional communities. The clinic became a model for other initiatives to democratize access to justice in rural areas. The economic success of the project allowed Jessica to invest in improvements to local infrastructure. She funded renovations to the municipal school, improvements to the access road, and a professional training program for young people in the region. Ryan Michael, now 10 years old, began developing his own historical research projects, always supervised by adults, but demonstrating remarkable initiative and curiosity. His projects became an additional attraction for student groups visiting the property. The international partnerships developed by the project resulted in the creation of an exchange program for specialists in sustainable rural development. Professionals from different countries visited the property to learn about the American model, while members of the local team visited similar projects abroad. The preserved forest on the property became a natural laboratory for research on the recovery of degraded ecosystems. Techniques developed there were applied in other areas of the region, contributing to the environmental recovery of areas previously degraded by intensive agriculture. Jessica Carter established a community advisory board to ensure the project's development always respected the interests and values of the local community. The board included representatives from different age groups and sectors of the local economy, ensuring democratic participation in decisions. The project developed its own brand for agricultural and artisanal products produced in the region, adding value through association with local history and sustainability. The brand became a symbol of quality and social responsibility, attracting consumers interested in products with a story. The sustainable construction techniques used in expanding the tourism infrastructure, based on traditional methods adapted with modern technology, became a reference for other sustainable rural architecture projects. Rebecca developed a training program in historical research for local residents interested in documenting the history of their own families and properties. The program strengthened the region's cultural identity and also revealed other sites of historical interest. Joseph Charles created a digital platform to promote rural historical tourism throughout the region, integrating different properties and attractions into a more complete tourist experience. The platform became a model for other decentralized tourism promotion initiatives. The Historical Tourism Center established an artist residency program, offering space and support for artists interested in creating works inspired by the local history and landscape. The works produced enriched the property's cultural collection and also attracted visitors interested in contemporary art. Attorney Marcus Thompson documented the social and economic impact of heritage protection in the region in an academic study that became a reference for policymakers and public managers interested in sustainable rural development. The study demonstrated that historical preservation can be economically more advantageous than predatory commercial development. The property's experience influenced the creation of a national network of rural historical properties, connecting similar initiatives in different regions of the country. The network facilitated the exchange of experiences, training, and joint promotion of rural historical tourism. Jessica Carter became a recognized advocate for the rights of small rural landowners and began to be consulted by non-governmental organizations and social movements interested in combating real estate speculation in rural areas. The project attracted interest from researchers in solidarity economics as a successful example of economic development based on community cooperation and environmental sustainability. Studies on the experience were published in national and international academic journals. Ryan Michael developed a photographic documentation project of the archaeological activities on the property, creating a visual archive that served both for research and for promoting the project. Her photographs were exhibited in regional cultural showcases. The property became the headquarters for a sustainable tourism training program for local youth interested in developing careers in the tourism sector. The program ensured that the growth of local tourism was accompanied by the training of qualified professionals from the community itself. The property's springs became the water source for a pilot project of certified organic agriculture that included several neighboring properties. The project demonstrated that preserved water resources can sustain diversified, high-quality agriculture. Rebecca became a consultant specialized in developing rural historical tourism projects, advising communities from different regions interested in following a model similar to the one developed on Jessica's property. Joseph Charles created a system to monitor the environmental impact of tourism on the property, ensuring that the growth of tourist activities did not compromise the preservation of natural resources. The system became a model for other tourism projects in sensitive areas. The project's success caught the attention of responsible investors interested in supporting sustainable development initiatives in small communities. Jessica managed to secure additional resources that allowed for the expansion of the project without compromising its fundamental principles of preservation and community participation. Attorney Marcus Thompson established a research center for applied rural law that used the property's experience as a laboratory for developing new legal approaches to protect small rural landowners from predatory speculation. The property's experience inspired the creation of specific courses on sustainable rural development in university programs across different fields. Students of economics, history, law, tourism, and other areas regularly visited the property as part of their academic training. Ryan Michael, now a teenager, began leading groups of young visitors, developing communication and leadership skills that prepared him for a future role in continuing the project. He demonstrated a natural ability to connect ancient history with contemporary issues. The project developed partnerships with sustainable tourism initiatives in other Latin American countries, creating an international circuit of similar experiences. Interested tourists could visit different rural historical preservation projects, strengthening the sector as a whole. Jessica was invited to join national councils on rural development and heritage protection, bringing the perspective of small communities to public policy-making bodies. Her voice became important, in defending the interests of small rural landowners. The property established a program to recover traditional local craft techniques, offering training for young people interested in learning crafts that were disappearing. The handmade products became an additional source of income and also a tourist attraction. End of story. So what did you think of this incredible story of overcoming and determination? Jessica could have easily accepted the 100,000 reais and moved on with her life, but she chose to fight for what was right. Tell us in the comments, would you have the courage to face all that pressure to preserve something important? Leave a like if the story moved you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories full of twists and turns.